Hello and welcome to the Empowered, Sensitive and Creative podcast. My name is Rim. I'm an artist, a certified life coach and an NLP practitioner, and the creator of the Empowered, Sensitive and Creative retreats. Passionate about celebrating joy and beauty in the everyday, especially when things are falling apart, I'm insatiably curious about human nature, and I look into the world with reverence, awe, and a sense of wonder. Tune in for stories exploring healing through creativity, art, embracing sensitivity, and navigating the subconscious mind. I'll talk about the struggles that highly sensitive and creative people face, and share my experiences, insights, and favorite tools along the way. I'm here to empower you to turn what we often deem to be a curse into your biggest gift. I believe that the more we create together, the more we heal the world. So let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowered, Sensitive and Creative podcast. I'm so happy and grateful for you tuning in. I discovered the world of podcast in summer 2019, I believe. Yes, I was a bit late to the party. At that time, I was feeling lonely and a bit cut off from the world I knew. I was in Shanghai at that time, and well, I enjoyed life over there a lot. But as you may know, international social medias are not easily accessible over there. And yeah, I had been feeling a little bit cut off from the rest of the world. And the more I listened to podcasts, the more I felt burgeoning in me the idea that perhaps I'll start one day. I didn't know for sure what I'd be talking about, and most of all, I was convinced that nobody would care. Until 6 months ago, I heard a voice within me whispering that I launched that podcast 6 months later. I just have to pick a symbolic date. I love symbols. I think it's just a fun way to give meaning into things and, kind of celebrating things and make the ordinary seem extraordinary. I picked my birthday, as for me it's a symbol for renewal and rebirth. And so we are, today, a few days before my birthday, and I'm here recording my first podcast episode. For this first episode, I thought it would be interesting to share a bit of my background story, what role creativity had in my life, and how I found out I was a highly sensitive person, how it affected me, and how I found myself living around the world in quest of adventures and meaning. And also to give you a bit of context into who I am and why I came to create this podcast. Like many HSPs, highly sensitive people, and empaths, I unconsciously believed I was permanently doomed because of my high sensitivity. And I thought that there was no real place for me in the world. I thought my voice didn't matter. So reclaiming my voice, my expression, and giving that to myself is like a great birthday gift to my younger self, to show my inner child that we are safe and that we belong, that it is safe to take space. It's safe. And by doing so, my intention is to show you what's also possible for you when you reclaim your unique voice. I want to show you that you're safe too and that your voice matters. Also, I found that many of us tend to dismiss the seemingly little things in our lives as not that important. It's not that big a deal. But in fact, deep down, we know that they marked us quite a lot. By sharing those events with you, in my experience, and how I realized that it actually affected me more than what I thought, or more that I wanted to say, I hope it will help you see your life through a different lens, and I hope feel less lonely. Because we, highly sensitive people, We are people who feel deeply, we're highly emotional, but often because we've been told we are too much, too sensitive, too emotional, we try not to show it. It's scary to be vulnerable. We love peace and harmony, so we want people around us to be happy and safe and comfortable. And sometimes we forget about our own comfort and satisfaction and well being. I'll talk more about HSP, empaths, the struggles we face, the challenges, and how it's actually a great thing, a great superpower. But first, I'll share about my story. I've always been a sensitive and creative soul, alternating with deep states of melancholy and joyful, sunny disposition. As a child, I was fearful and anxious about many things, and yet at the same time, I had deep knowing and trust about some other things that seemed quite obvious to me. The fear started right after my birth. Well, I think that coming into the world is kind of scary for all the little babies. Suddenly you're being cut off from the warm and comfy home you've always known for the past 9 months, and the way out is not amongst the easiest. It's not always smooth, and it's quite painful. Well, in my case, it's what happened next that really marked me. You see, I was born in Libya. Yes, Libya. My parents, a young couple full of idealism but broke, had met a few years earlier at l'École des Beaux-Arts, their fine art college in Paris. They had fallen in love over their shared passion for art and creativity. Fast forward a few years, they had a child, my sister, and my mom got a job offer to work as a professor at the University of Tripoli. And that was paid in US dollars, which was a big deal at that time. So, not knowing much about what to expect, they arrived there in September 1981, excited for their new life ahead. The reality of it was quite abrupt. Life was tough there. They lived in the campus, which was gigantic and isolated. No women outside in the streets. They had no car because their car had been refused entry into the Libyan territory. It was an American car and therefore not allowed in. It was the 80s. My dad had no job. There was nothing in the apartment. No furniture, no fridge, and super hot weather. But anyway, my parents were young and enthusiastic, and they went about their life, doing as much as they could with what they had. And then they found out they were pregnant with me. Oops. Surprise. Well, a bit of an additional hurdle, but still they were really happy about that news. Men were not allowed in the clinic where my mom gave birth, so she had to do it on her own that day. And right after I was born, the nurses took me away from my mom. They were nurses coming from Hungary. It was communism then, back then. So the ideology at that time was that babies should not be breastfed by their mom and also should not be left too close to them at birth. I don't know why. Like, my mom never really understood why. She just saw that's how it was. I remember she said that she and my dad tried to find a reason, they tried to understand, but then they realized there's no point. There's some stuff you just cannot understand. People have their ideology, and sometimes it really defies the law of logic. Well, anyway, what we know is that they took me away without asking my mom's opinion. Like, I was born, my mom took me in her arms a few minutes, and then they took me away. And of course, she was scared. She had to cry and beg until they listened to her and put me back into her arms. So it ends well. It doesn't seem that big a deal. And in fact, she always told me the story more like an anecdote, like a joke. And she said, it just happened. It just lasted maybe 10 minutes or 20 minutes altogether. And consciously, I didn't think it had impacted me. I just thought, oh, the funny story about my birth in Libya. And and that's it. I didn't give it much more thought. Um, but years later, when I was doing a hypnosis session, I relived that scene. Like the hypnosis, the prompt was, remember the earliest time you felt abandoned. And I relived that experience. I could see the scene. I was back inside my baby's body, or, like I could see with my younger baby's eyes. And I could feel the intense fear I felt back then and how I thought I was being abandoned. I thought my mom didn't want me and that the nurses were mean. I think, yes, my first impression of the world was, wow, the world is a tough place. It's cruel, it's mean. Like, maybe I'm not wanted. There's no place for me. Um, so yeah, that's the first few minutes. Then I got back to my mom, and she took very well care of me. And well, another funny story. And I think it's maybe also where the sense of adventure comes in. Men were not allowed in the hospital, and of course, my dad wanted to visit my mom and wanted to see me. So they told me that he used to climb on the orange trees by the walls, in the garden of the clinic, and then he would climb through the windows to jump into the room and see my mom and see me. I think that's quite cute and quite romantic. But it also goes to show how tough it must have been for my parents. And we kids, we like babies, they can feel everything, even though we cannot speak and we don't maybe understand the words, but we can feel the vibes. And I think I already could feel the anxiety in my parents. And we came back home, and then everything was fine. Well, my elder sister was not happy about me being there. Um, but it was okay. And by the summer, the academic year was done, and my mom didn't renew her contract, and they decided to leave Libya. 1 year was enough. And so I took the plane for the first time as a 2 months old baby. Already the traveler back then. After leaving Libya, my parents moved to Tunisia for a while. Well, we moved to Tunisia for a while as a family. Then we moved to Paris for 2 years, and then Burgundy, and then back to Tunisia. I remember what is the most interesting for me. Well, what I remember the most is this feeling that I was not fitting in. I did have a happy childhood. We were not missing anything. My parents, especially my mom, she was always showing us some activities involving arts, and we were dancing, drawing, reading stories, singing together. When we were in Burgundy, we were living in the countryside, very close to nature, with a big garden. It was lovely. That was lovely. But what I remember about other human beings is I remember that I felt like I'm always different. When I was in France, I felt like already my name, like my sister and I, our names were different because physically, I know it sounds a bit maybe superficial, but that's the truth. I mean, that's how I experienced it. Like physically speaking, we looked very French, especially me, but our names were not. So people were always like wondering who are like why like you're a bit strange, you know? And like in France, I always had this feeling that I'm a foreigner or that I'm a little bit different. And then when we moved to Tunisia, I also had the feeling that actually we're different. I'm a foreigner. In France, I was the one with a weird name, and my sister was called Salahab at school, which means like bloody Arab. Um, and then when we moved to Tunisia, we were never called bloody French, but I heard it. I heard it at school. I heard some kids, local kids, saying that to other people. But I remember I was always being singled out because I had blue eyes, and that's less common thing in Tunisia than in France, let's say. And pale skin, and it was like, but I kind of resented it because I thought I was only being seen for my face, uh, and like the rest didn't matter. I was being dismissed, me as a person, as someone who has thoughts or personality or things to say. I thought, well, okay, I'm being seen for the cute little girl with blue eyes. So, well, I remember spending hours and hours and hours playing with my dolls, drawing. I had a phase where I loved drawing my future house, my dream castle, or drawing dancers. Mm, Also making clothes for my dolls and telling stories. My sister, elder sister, and I used to play for hours and invent stories. We were very good girls when we were not fighting, because we were fighting a lot, but when we were not fighting, we were very good girls, um, quiet, clean, doing the homeworks, not causing any problems. And I thought I had a perfect childhood when I was a kid. I thought, why I'm so lucky. I'm so lucky. My family is fine. My parents get along. And I remember saying this to myself when I was like 8 or 9. Maybe I heard some classmates whose parents had been divorced, and I was thinking, wow, that must be tough, but I'm lucky because my parents get on well together. Little did I know. Only a few years later, I realized how dysfunctional my family was. But at that time, I didn't know, or I didn't want to see it. My parents encouraged my artistic side, so I felt that that's very lucky because so many kids are not pushed by their parents to go that way. Parents say you have to be reasonable, you need to think about a proper profession, you need to be good at math before anything else. And while my mom really wanted us to do well at school, she always privileged our creative expression. So for that, I'm really grateful. I decided I wanted to become a fashion designer from a very young age, probably 8 or 9. I decided I will be a fashion designer when I'm an adult, and it was kind of an obsession. I would draw and draw and draw and draw every day. I covered so many sketchbooks. I was dreaming about the world of fashion, of couture. It was the early 90s, and well, the early 90s was kind of this magical time in fashion. I want to say that kind of the last, to my opinion, great decade of fashion. Uh, and at that time, You know, it was the era of Alexander McQueen, John Galliano, Vivienne Westwood, uh, and I was dreaming about them and their designs and how modern and playful and clever and at the same time creative and innovative they were, like playing with the codes of our fashion and reinventing them. I thought that was really magical, very inspiring for me. Um, Living in Tunisia was like being in a sort of a bubble, um, close to France, but far enough that it's completely different. It's a different world, and lifestyle was quite slow. Well, except school, where of course we had homeworks and stuff going on, but otherwise, life in general is quite slow, slow paced. The weather is sunny almost all year long. It's North Africa, south of the Mediterranean Sea. Um, we lived maybe 25 minutes away from the beach, so we could go often. Um, Sunny, we had this house with a big garden, and the house my parents designed and kind of built themselves. My dad designed the plans, my parents then designed the furniture. I remember the carpet, the sofa, the curtains, everything, the bed, the windows, even the blinders were designed by my parents and made by local craftsmen. This is one of the great things about growing up there, is that I was exposed to all this knowledge, this craft, um, this heritage from generations about how to make things. I love that. I'm always fascinated and so impressed by these humans who know how to do very precise things with their hands, beautiful things. Um, the garden as well, my parents designed it, and actually they planted every little bit of grass and every little flower, every tree. They planted it themselves. So you know, it was really amazing. Like, that was really lucky. It's such a special house, and I remember often, like, the house was um, at the bottom of a street, going down. Like, the street would go down, and at the bottom, on the perpendicular street, there would be my house, and so, like, a lot of people would drive past it. Basically, like, in that neighborhood, you had to drive past my house, and I remember people, ringing at the door and saying, "Wow, I was driving past, and your house is so special. Can we come? Can we visit it?" Because it was a very original house, and unfortunately, I just could not find any pictures of it. I took some pictures. Like, I had a series. I took a series of pictures before leaving, and I think I lost them. But I will always have the image in my head anyway, in my memories. Like, that was kind of a version of paradise in appearance, but also I felt I'm in this not real life bubble. What I mean is, I went to the French school, which is kind of French international school, with students from all over the world, which was amazing because it was very multicultural, international, people from all horizons. Um, that was very mind opening, and at the same time, I could see later on that actually that's not how it is everywhere. These were the kids of diplomats, the kids of ministers or big company CEOs, expats, and so on. Um, so we didn't have always the same values. I think it was incredibly eye opening and at the same time reinforced my notion that I was different and that I didn't fit in. I just wanted to work in the arts, I wanted to work in fashion. I didn't care about getting a prestigious job as a diplomat or as a scientist, as a doctor. I didn't care about any of the things. I just wanted to do something creative. And well, yeah, that was seen in a way as a little bit different. There were not many opportunities for art back then in Tunisia. There was only one cinema, for example. It's small. There was not much going on, and I was longing for Paris. I was dreaming about going to Paris for my studies. I used to travel there every summer to see my grandparents, and every year I was looking forward to that time. I thought this was like the key to freedom. Paris, Paris, Paris. I thought there is no way I would live anywhere else in the world. That's the best place. It's paradise. I was looking forward to that time so much. I love the sun, the sunshine, and the weather and the kindness of people in Tunisia. But sometimes you don't know the good things when you have them, especially when we are young. I think I I just wanted, I was longing for connections with the world, communication, adventures, um, maybe excitement in some ways, intellectual and creative artistic stimulation. And I felt like my life over there was lacking that. The artistic scene was not much developed and there was no internet back then. We did find ways um, to have access to cultural things from our times, but it was often delayed by 1 year or two. Uh, and well, that led me to be I was naturally quite introvert, but that led me even more, in introversion, spending time with myself, drawing, taking notes, writing. From a young age, I remember I oscillated between enjoying time with others and wanting to explore communication with others, with other children. Like I was curious to know about them. But at the same time, I I think it was mostly by my mom and my elder sister kind of made to understand that it's better to stay in or with the family. My elder sister was very shy, very introvert, and she didn't make friends very easily. And she was also very possessive and quite jealous, so she wanted me for herself. Like she wouldn't want me to go and play with the other kids. And my mom had a lot of anxiety at the time. I didn't know back then, but she told me later on. She had huge anxious episodes, and I think she kind of felt more secure if I was staying at home. We used to fight a lot with my sister, and yeah, it was a very complicated relationship because we were just the two of us. We were spending time together and playing a lot together. but also arguing a lot and saying terrible things to each other. And yeah, at that time the thought was, well, that's normal, children, siblings, they fight, they argue, but it will pass when they grow up. The thing is, it never passed, and only years later realized how abusive uh, her behavior was toward me. I'm sharing this because I noticed that we talk a lot about the role of parents in our upbringing. Dysfunctional family often are about toxic parents, immature parents, and emotional parents, abusive parents. And then later on, we talk about people being abused by the narcissistic partners. But we don't talk much about siblings, siblings abuse, I think, especially when it comes from a sister. And, well, I don't think I'm the only one who experienced that. So that's why I want to share that. I think if you went through a similar experience, I want you to know you are not alone, you are not crazy, and sometimes siblings can have dramatic impact on us. We didn't know that my elder sister was a narcissist back then, of course not, and she probably was not the first few years of her life, but surely she did grow up displaying all the traits of a narcissist, and her behavior is totally narcissistic abuse. And it was not easy for me, and like we knew there was something strange about her behavior, like compared to other kids, even the other kids who fight who fight with their siblings. We thought, okay, sure, but that's a little bit extreme. And she, like, even though we didn't talk for years, I remember I was still having nightmares about her for so many years. And I noticed that actually my inner critic is not my voice, it's her voice that I could hear policing my every thoughts or my every behavior. It was really difficult for me to express myself in public or express myself to others, because I always felt like my voice doesn't matter, my voice doesn't deserve to be heard, because that's the model I grew up on. I grew up with her, and that was quite tough, to be honest. I think my parents didn't see it. They didn't want to see it. They could not see it. They had their own issues themselves that they were trying to handle. Also, at that time, where I grew up at least, it was not very popular to go to the therapist. It was not well spread as now, not something that people would do often, especially with kids. So I think my mom didn't think about it. She thought she could handle it. She thought that love was so strong that it could handle everything. And I think that's a beautiful intention. Yes, love can be very strong, but sometimes with people who have deep troubles, deep issue, love is not enough. They need to see a doctor, a specialist, a health specialist. My mom had her own emotional immaturity that she was not aware of at that time, her anxiety as well. My dad was an alcoholic. He was not much present at home, so that was also added, added stress, let's say, to the family dynamic. therefore the issue with my sister was kind of shoved under the rug. It will pass. They will grow up and it will be fine. They are smart, they are clever, it will be fine. My sister was always the first of class. She was very bright, very mature in so many ways, very talented. The eldest, the kind of the picture perfect eldest child. I was messy, and actually I developed being messy, especially because she was so ordered and clean and organized. But what was really painful, I think some of our fights were just like normal children fighting, but the worst was I could feel that she reproached me to be alive. I developed asthma very young, from a very young age. And yeah, of course, later I realized, well, I probably felt smothered, and I felt like my only way to exist and to express myself was through asthma. That's why I developed it. But at that time, of course, I didn't know I was a child. And I remember especially one night when we were sharing the same room at my grandparents', and I had a big asthma crisis and I could not breathe. And the only thing she said to me, she was, "Oh, you annoy me so much. Because of you, I cannot sleep. You're so annoying, like you shouldn't be here." And I was trying, I was panting, I was trying to breathe. I was like, like this. And my sister said that to me. It felt so hurtful. And of course, I said to my mom, you know what my sister said? And of course, my mom said, no, of course, it's not your fault that you are sick and everything. But I think she didn't take it seriously enough. Like the lack of empathy that my sister displayed was quite impressive. And how in so many families there are some specific dynamics and some specific roles. Of course, this is like unconscious. It's not like something family members consciously decide and say, okay, you are this, you are that, but it's implicit. And our family dynamic very quickly became clear, as in, like, I am the one who has empathy, and I am the one who can be reasonable and who need to make efforts and to take it upon herself. My mom used to tell me, Reem, you are strong, you can understand, you can understand, like you have empathy, you can understand that your sister, it's more difficult for her to understand, so you are the one who can make the effort, like put yourself into her shoes. And she would say also to my sister to make an effort, but it was more like she could feel like she knew that my sister couldn't do it. She couldn't make the effort. She was not willing to do it. As I said earlier, she didn't have empathy. And she had the role of the smart one, the organized one, and the one who is right. That's kind of how it was. Like, she's the smart one, the mature one, and I was the one who needs to make the effort. I was also called emotional, too sensitive, as in, like I get hurt easily by people's words, and therefore I should make an effort not to take things too personally, like as if I was taking things too personally. And later on, when my parents had a third child, she took on the role of the fun one, the one who has a big sense of humor, the extroverted one. So in one way, there was the smart one, then the fun one, And then I felt, and the one who talks very well, the good communicator, and I felt like I was stuck as, okay, the pretty one, the one with the big blue eyes, and also the one who needs to make effort, the one who kind of doesn't really have an opinion, or if she does, is not really allowed to defend it or to talk about it. Of course, nobody said that in those terms, but that's how it kind of turned out. I remember I felt really kind of stuck, like sandwiched between my two sisters. I felt like maybe I'm like the lettuce, the leaf of lettuce, you know, who doesn't have a lot of purpose in the family dynamic. Or at least the purpose is to garnish, to be pretty. And of course, this is not something I was aware of on a conscious level. Um, it's much later that I understood that. Um, but yeah, overall, I felt like I was not listened to as much as the other two. Like I was not taken seriously. My dad also used to to make lots of jokes about how I was like a real girl and too sensitive and too naive, and that men will take advantage of me, and that I could break very easily. He would say these kind of things, and he would laugh, and then he would believe it, like ho 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 ho. And of course, that was very annoying. And consciously, I didn't believe it, but I think a subconscious part of me ended up believing it. And in a way, it's true. I was very sensitive. I was susceptible. I could get hurt easily. Like I would take things personally. Um, I was often daydreaming in my world, in my inner world. As I also said earlier, like I felt different from the other kids um, because of my interest. I was interested by art, culture, rather than sports. Also, when I went to high school, I could feel the main values were money and power, and I was not interested by that. I was more interested by art, culture, rebellion, intellectual, like thinking, like debating ideas. And also, I grew up like in Tunisia. It was kind of like officially, it was not a Muslim country at that time, but it was obviously very inspired by the religion, at least in the culture, and quite sexist, really. And as soon as I started to become a young woman, I grew up quite early. So at 10, 11, I already had my breast growing. And at that time, I felt like I cannot walk in the streets anymore. It's annoying. I would get followed by men in cars, catcalled in the streets all the time. Um, it was really, really, really frustrating. And I resented that time. I have to say, I really resented those years. I felt like I'm just seen as a prey, as a sexual object, even though I was too young to think about sex. Really, I even didn't know anything about it. But I felt, given the culture, that was really. And I could hear like the neighbors making remarks about the girls in the street who, like one neighbor was like, ha ha ha, the neighbors, like that neighbor's daughter is such a vulgar, she's such a sexual person because she's wearing shorts in summer. It's 40 degrees Celsius, of course she's gonna wear shorts. So it was stuff like that. It was not like Tunisia was not, at least especially in my environment, were quite uh, multicultural, educated neighborhood, all of that. But still, there was this still big impact of sexism, and typical Mediterranean, well, let's say typical, maybe not typical anymore, but as it was back then, Mediterranean culture, and that was heavy as a woman. And I've always felt injustice is horrible. Like I've always felt very deeply for when freedoms, people's individual freedoms, are not being respected. So for me, that was really hard. Like I really resented that time, and that made me want to go to Paris even more because I knew in Paris it would be different and I would be working in fashion, so no sexism, at least from what I imagined. And I thought I would have much more freedom over there. One way I found to find solace and express myself in this environment was it was through music, as I said, art, but also through music. I remember I was listening to grunge and rock and even hard rock back then, which was quite different from the mainstream taste of my community, of my high school. Um, and one summer, I went on summer camp to Ireland and to England, and I bought some hair dye, and I dyed some of my hair green. And and then next September, I went back to school, and I was the only kid uh, with my hair dyed. In Tunisia, we were quite preserved. Well, preserved. It was kind of a bubble. Not we in my school. We didn't have the same freedom or the same openness that European kids had, and in a way, maybe it was good because we didn't have a lot of problem linked to violence and drugs and all of that. Not really, not much. But in another way, it felt like a kind of a golden bubble, a golden cage in a way, because just dyeing some of my hair green seemed like a big revolution, like a big shock. Like everybody was looking at me like, you, and this was the 90s, so I'm not talking about the 50s, I'm talking about the 90s. So, yes, through music and through fashion, let's say through my physical appearance, I found ways to express my personality or my rebellion, my thoughts, my beliefs, uh, all the while longing for times when I could move to Paris and pursue my dreams and be free. It was during that time that my father became really having problems with alcohol, like more than before. My parents were arguing a lot. It was not that fun anymore. Like by then, I realized my family is not perfect as well, and I was wishing so hard for my parents to divorce, but it didn't happen back then. It happened later, but not at that time. And um, that's when I started to develop issues, emotional issues with food. I developed a strong emotional eating habit. Um, Also started to over exercise at times to try to probably numb my feelings and control what I thought I could control, because it was difficult to exist really at home. Like, of course, I could exist, but I began to think there is always something wrong with me. I felt like I cannot control much. Human beings are emotionally strange. I felt like adults, my parents, whom I thought I could, count on, they're actually not very responsible. Um, they don't know, so they don't know how to handle things. School, well, I do what I can, just counting the time until I can get away. So the only thing I can control is food, exercising, and drawing. Just drawing and dreaming of the future. The weather was amazing. The climate, sunny almost all year long. What a chance! Um, Flowers all year long. the landscape, it's a beautiful country. The chance to have a garden, to grow up with plants all year long, the culture, the history of the country, had been a beautiful impact. But at that time, it didn't seem that exciting, you know. So yes, the arts, fashion, drawing, creativity, also cooking. I started to enjoy cooking back then. Were all it was like an incredible refuge, safe space for me to be myself when the rest was kind of slowly falling apart. The rest of my family and my beliefs, and I would say my illusions, my childhood illusion about family and what it was and how safe it was supposed to be. It was, yes, disintegrating. I think I was not yet conscious of it. I could feel it or perceive it, but I was not able to put words into it. I just knew things were strange and didn't make sense and not really fair and not that safe. So I think there was a lot of repressed anger boiling within me. So yes, arts and creative was like a safe haven. So even though my parents didn't really know what they were doing and they had a lot of issues, at least, I mean, I feel so lucky. It's such a chance that they shared with me their love for beauty, the appreciation for the poetic things in life, the little things in life, like appreciating a sunrise, being in awe, watching a flower blooming. I know it can sound a little bit like naive, but really, when you see sometimes how we waste time and energy fighting about silly things and power and hatred and the ugly things of life, which of course also happen, I'm not diminishing that, but being able to enjoy the little things, to see the beauty around us, helps so much. It helps to spend the day, you know, like take the day by day and still appreciate life as it is. Even though it's not perfect, even though there are difficult times, beauty is still here, beauty is still around. And I think I was not aware at that time of how precious it was. But what I learned later on is how amazing it is, because nobody can take this away from me. Creativity, arts, my thoughts, my daydreams, my inner world, nobody can take it away from me, and it's always there. If in many areas of my life, I at that time I developed this belief that I was not enough, that I was not good enough, and also too much, taking too much space or being too emotional, to this, to that, not enough this, not enough that, blah 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 blah. I There was one domain where I knew I was enough, and that was creativity and drawing and this world of fashion that I was totally obsessed with. For me, it was I don't know, maybe it was an escape, but it was really the dream, and it really helped me to go through that time, remaining sane. So when time came to apply to university and thinking about the future after high school, I only applied to one school in Paris. I just knew it. I was not scared at all. I was like, that's it, I'm doing this. And I even didn't consider it any other option. I applied to that school, I got in, and at 17 and 2 months, I packed all my stuff. I left home and I moved to Paris. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and if it has inspired you, please share it around you. Also, if you feel called to it, please subscribe to the podcast and leave me a review. It really helps to spread the word out. All your questions are welcome. You can send them to me on Instagram at rim.creativenergy.com or email me via my website, rimcreativenergy.com. And don't worry, I'll share in the show notes exactly where to find me. Until next time, sending you loving creative energy.